Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. We are approaching a 3-day weekend. Hopefully, you can get some nice rest and relaxation and enjoy a long weekend. But we are here today to talk about May's Driving Success webinar. This is going to be even more relevant as SCOTUS just announced, that ruling about brokers being held accountable for um, you know, pushing out loads to those who potentially may not be very safe on the road for carriers. So today we're talking about Chameleon Effect, how hidden driver risk enters your fleet. Before we get started, I'll go ahead and do my quick little housekeeping as people kind of trickle in this morning. This webinar is going to be recorded, so don't feel like you need to go ahead and write everything down that we talk about today. A recording will be available after the webinar will be sent to your email, also available on our website or our LinkedIn as well. So I know we're a little bit early morning today, so we'll see as people trickle in. Feel free to throw any comments or questions into the chat as we get started. But happy to have everyone here today. So let's go ahead and get started. So I want to kind of touch on what even is a chameleon driver. This has been a kind of a hot buzzword lately, especially with the chameleon carriers coming out recently, the story behind that. And with a chameleon carrier comes chameleon drivers. So the chameleon carrier is really just a carrier who was operating unsafely. They have reached threshold of really being shut down or potentially being shut down. So they close out their operations and basically start up a new one. They just apply for a new DOT, use the same fleet, same drivers, same management, same everything, and they kind of have like a clean slate essentially, even though it's really the same operating entity. So with that comes these chameleon drivers. So they move between carriers to reset the visibility. So they may potentially be at that same company, the Chameleon company, but as they expand their careers or move on from those companies, they can bring these bad driving habits with them while they apply to work under your DOT and your authority. So typically they bring hidden or incomplete history. So when they're filling out their employment, there's employment gaps that they either say is a gap period in their time, or they're just putting the data down and it's not a real company. It's kind of hard to verify the information, the safety information that was there at the time of employment. Again, not missing safety history, or they have inconsistent applications. So it's really just kind of hide their time at the company that was either shut down or close to shutting down with the chameleon carrier. So a lot of this is going to be seen in the hiring process. Now, there are requirements that are put into place, the DOT application, the pre-employment MVR, doing your clearinghouse query, previous employer checks, and drug and alcohol testing. All of this stuff, just to kind of talk about the basics, right? All of this is put into the regulation to catch the risk before it gets, behind the wheel. Now, if you're following these requirements, one, good, because you're in compliance, and two, in theory, you should be catching these risks before they become become an issue for your DOT number. Now, that's not always the case because there is still some potentials for gaps, even if you're following these steps. So we're going to go through those gaps. So in the application, right, there's employment gaps that could happen. And a lot of companies who aren't utilizing either a system that catches those gaps, or they're using paper applications, or they're just unaware of checking the gaps. We're moving through things a little quickly. We kind of miss things, human error, it happens, right? That's a really easy time for a chameleon driver, a driver who has a high risk profile, to either say that they had a leave of absence during, a time. They're allowed up to 30 days of gaps without being recorded on an application. So that's a really easy way to kind of manipulate that. Also, if you're utilizing like a paper application or a PDF type of application where it's not really making them put things in order of timeline or anything like that, it could be really easy for a driver to put some employment application from here and then put a gap from 10 years ago and not make things in order. So it's really hard to track those dates and those times, and to really evaluate if there truly is a gap, a true gap. So it makes it a little bit difficult, right? um and then it's hard because a lot of applications actually aren't DOT, you know, they don't meet the DOT requirements. Again, with those gaps, it's really easy for like a paper application or PDF to skip those gaps. It's really easy for certain things to not be on an application, like the drug and alcohol questionnaire. Have you ever completed a return to duty? Have you ever tested positive? Stuff like that, which is important because even if they forge that information, it's important for the carrier to collect that up front because of litigation that could happen. And we'll go a little bit more into depth about, why kind of going above and beyond is more important than just meeting that requirement for DOT. So the next thing is your MVR, right? If you're doing your previous employer MVR, you should be catching risky behavior. But the reality is there are incidents that go unreported, right? If it is an incident that happened in a yard, right? Might not necessarily be reported on the individual's license, especially if they're working for a chameleon driver, right? The chameleon carrier, or sorry, chameleon carrier. The chameleon carrier is not going to report or track incidents that occur with on their own premises. Um, and then there's also, if you do your pre-employment, everything comes out good for your MVR, but then you have that blind spot for 364 days. If you're not have a monitoring system to track that behavior, you're not going to be able to know if that driver is implementing risky behaviors outside of their hours of service with you. Um, then we have our clearinghouse query, and again, unreported positives. It does happen, especially if this was something that happened, when they first implemented the clearinghouse. If you were dealing with that at that time, you know how much of a cluster that was. Accounts were closed out, accounts were created, you couldn't log in because the FMCSA system glitched out, it crashed their system. MROs were not up and running to electronically push that information. I mean, there was a lot. There's a lot going on, and it still happens today. I mean, there's still glitches, there's still people fat finger stuff all the time. It happens, right? So even if you're running that query, I mean, there is a potential that there's an unreported positive. And then we have the CMV operating drivers. Now, the clearinghouse doesn't run drug and alcohol if you don't have a CDL. So it's really hard to catch the drivers that don't have a CDL but are still operating in a safety sensitive manner. You don't have that level of protection there. And then we have drug and alcohol, there's a very easy, they can just be temporarily clean, right? Temporary clean, they never get chosen for randoms at their chameleon carrier. They weren't properly in a random testing consortium. There's a ton that could happen between the drug and alcohol testing. And then there's the previous employer safety check. So this goes back to the employment gaps, not putting employment information on there, right? If you don't have the employment information, it's really hard for you to do a safety check on that individual. It's really hard to do an employment verification on that individual. And then on top of that is the database pings. We talked about this prior about, a lot of background checks or safety check type of companies are just using like an AI database type of ping. And really all it does is sends 3 pings to a big database to see if they can gather information in regards to that company and that driver. And if that company comes back with it's just bad data because it's the internet, it's AI, sometimes it just doesn't give you the information you need, then that's your due diligence and you don't get the information that you need. So even if you follow these steps, there is a potential that there's still room for drivers to kind of sneak by, especially if they're drivers that truly have bad intentions. They're just not following safety protocols from the very beginning. They were hired by a chameleon carrier who installed these bad habits into their manners and stuff like that. So there is still a potential for gaps. So there are some things that the FMCSA has done in the past to kind of close these gaps, which is the clearinghouse, right? Making everything electronic has helped with companies not forging safety data on the safety verifications that are sent out pre-employment, pre-employment query requirements. Increased focus on the previous employer verification. There has been an increase in that as well. And then also just the CSA and SMS system foundation for identifying like risk patterns. Some recent things that they've done is, really crack down on those fraudulent CDL schools. That has been in the news, a couple months ago about that. Non-compliant carriers and unsafe driving, just really cracking down on that, being a little bit more diligent about audits and making sure that people are following the steps that they need to. There's really been a uptick in driver focus over the past couple of years. I feel like a lot of legislation and a lot of focus for the FMCSA has been around refining the safety of drivers, and a lot of the messaging from these technology companies have been really more focusing about driver safety and driver behaviors, because those are the ones operating vehicles, right? Those are, for the most part, we do have some autonomous vehicles out there, but those are the ones, the drivers that are really going to be the face of safety for your company. Registration modernization efforts, replacing outdated systems with the new modus that just came out too, which is not working apparently. Is people are having issues with that, and retiring that legacy SMS login. Increased enforcement, focus on high-risk networks, again, really cracking down, and then on the non-domiciled CDLs as well. This was a huge gap that a lot of people saw as a problem. There was non-domiciled CDLs. They weren't being accounted for. They were expired. There was just a lot of problems with non-domiciled CDLs that legislation has changed. And then there's the recent legislation with the brokers being held accountable if they broker a load to a carrier who then has an incident, and they are no longer protected. I think there's some mixed feelings on that, but at the end of the day, I think it's really all coming back to safety and holding every person accountable who is in charge of that load getting from point A to point B safely. The brokers before, I think they're going to be held to a higher standard now, with having to check SMS scores, CSA scores and stuff like that, making sure that the companies that they're utilizing are real, they're true, they're safety forward. This is going to be a big change for those who utilize brokers for their loads. So this is where it kind of all plays into, even if you're meeting the requirements, the reality is that over 700,000 carriers are out there, right? And there's limited investigators. the risk is going to fall back on the carriers. Even if they have all these systems in place, you're following the regulations, accidents will happen. And it doesn't matter if it's a good driver, a perfect standing driver, if you've done all your safety checks, if you've climbed every mountain and threshed through every valley and everything like that, accidents are going to happen, whether it's the driver's fault, whether it's a civilian's fault. It happens all the time, right? um and what's really important, you know is what happens after. um you need to adopt a proactive protection approach, because again, if you follow all the steps and you, without knowledge, hire a driver who has risky safety behaviors, and you're unable to catch it because, just the data they gave you was wrong. You couldn't get feedback from your safety verifications. Clearinghouse had a hiccup. You got a good to go from the clearinghouse. Those steps of you showing that due diligence is what's going to matter if this turns into, a, a if it goes to court or something like that. If someone comes after you as a carrier, the showing that you've done your due diligence past what is required is really going to go far in terms of, when you're kind of battling some nuclear verdicts, essentially. Um, so what can you do as a carrier that is going to really set you over the top to protecting your company, protecting your drivers too, and just overall that safety forward message that you're going to give an auditor, you're going to give, brokers, if you work with brokers now, that you're going to give to, a time if you are under you know a a verdict or anything like that. What can you do as a carrier? So in your application process, have some way to do that gap reconciliation. If you're using paper, um, that's very difficult to do, to sit there and count the years. Make sure you're meeting that 10 years. Make sure that you have confirmed if the driver, does have gaps, that they're putting that in their application. Make sure that, you're counting that you're meeting that requirement. DQM does do that. It does force for the 10-year history. And then if they don't have 10-year history, it makes that driver confirm that they don't. So again, you as a carrier are checking that box that you have met the requirement, you understand it, you are making sure that you on your side are protecting that you've gathered that information. And then doing your verification. So, again, on the application, you should have something that states that they don't have another active license at the time, collecting that they don't have any past licenses, just getting that confirmation from the driver. So again, if someone comes back and says like, well, you didn't check their previous driving record, well, you can show that the driver stated that they didn't have anything. You can't check what you don't know. Doing your drug and alcohol questionnaire, this is a big, gap that we see with those who we kind of take on for consulting, or, utilize our software. Asking if the driver has ever tested positive, has ever completed a return to duty, is in the middle of completing a return to duty. Having that questionnaire, it's something that is missed a lot, I think, because it's kind of a small part of the regulation, and it's a small part of the application, considering the other parts of your application. It's just very easily missed. So making sure that you're, again, collecting that data, confirming that you asked those questions, you got a confirmation from the driver. It's that proactive protection. For your previous employer checks, your safety checks, make true contact attempts. Try to limit AI database pings. Try to limit well, I reached out 3 times. and I didn't get a response. It just really show that you called, emailed, faxed if you can, really doing those true attempts at a safety verification. Even if you don't get a reply, right? Because again, if it's a chameleon carrier, you're not going to get a reply. They're no longer a business. Just really making sure that you're showing that on your side, you are trying to get those safety verification checks. And then use your best judgment, obviously. If those come back, if they don't come back, how are you going to proceed with that? Behavior tracking, so proactive safety analytics. Again, it could be really easy for a driver to look all good to go. He's got safe habits, he's got, a clean record, everything like that. But there are going to be habits that are just cannot be shooken when they are now operating under your DOT number. So have a way to track those safety behaviors and get that data very easily to assess if a driver is going in a direction that is going to cause more harm than good. You want to be able to track that, especially if you have like camera data and cell phone tracking data, and you have harsh braking data from your ELDs, and there's all this data from these different platforms. And you got to make sure that there's a way for you to look at that all in one place to get the full picture of the driver. Um, Doing a road test. I mean, doing a road test is going to be very telling, despite what the flexibility in the regulation. If you just take that extra 15, 20 minutes, I think that will be, pretty telling for a driver's behavior, the ability for them to maneuver a truck. And really, it's just that extra step to protect your assets, right? These trucks are not cheap. They're very, very expensive assets. And then on top of it, if you have a truck that's in an accident, then it's down for not being able to utilize for a load. I mean, it goes more into just the initial 200,000, 300,000 investment for that truck. So you want to make sure that you're protecting your fleet as well. And then doing, continuous NVR monitoring. So NVR monitoring is really helpful for catching incidents outside, excuse me, outside of hours of service. It's really easy to know when a driver has harsh braking, is in an accident, runs a red light, when they are in your cab, when they are being watched by a camera, while they're being tracked by an ELD, while they're under your watch essentially. But the monitoring is going to show risky driving behaviors outside of, on their own time. So if they get a DUI, that's very important to know before they come and tell you, or have the option to tell you. This is information that you need to be tracking outside of just the monitoring that you're doing while they're in the cab or in the yard. So do have some recommended tools if you're not utilizing a software of some sort. These are two that I recommend: DQM Connect and Gateway Connect. These are the ones that we have built in-house and with over 25 years of consulting, DOT consulting knowledge. One is more driver focused and really helps with the onboarding and safety verifications and making sure that all your ducks are in a row for your drivers. And the other is more asset management, maintenance, and like fuel tax reporting and those kinds of things. So if you are looking for a way to, better qualify your drivers, to better manage your assets, these are two really great platforms to look into. That kind of concludes everything. Let me see if there's any questions or anything that came through during our presentation. If you have any that pop up, feel free to go ahead and throw them in the chat. I know we are coming up on our time on this great Friday. I hope your weather is a little bit better than mine. It's pretty gloomy out today here in Virginia. But I want to thank everyone for attending our webinar today. I hope you found it useful and educational. And as always, stay safe, stay compliant, and keep driving success. And enjoy the long weekend. Bye, everyone.